Cassandra Mitchell closed her eyes and felt the familiar rumble of engines beneath her feet. After 12 years of military service and countless hours in the cockpit of an F-18 Super Hornet, commercial flights should have felt like a gentle ride in comparison. But tonight, 37,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean, something was about to go terribly wrong. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The leather seat in first class was a luxury Cassandra rarely afforded herself, but tonight was different. She had just completed her final debriefing at Naval Air Station Oceana in Virginia Beach, officially ending her distinguished career as a naval aviator. The worn paperback novel in her lap, a thriller about international espionage, seemed fitting as she prepared to transition into civilian life as a commercial airline pilot. Flight 847 from New York to London was only 2 hours into its journey when Cassandra noticed the subtle change in engine pitch. Her trained ear caught what most passengers would never detect, a slight irregularity in the twin Rolls-Royce engines of the Boeing 777. She glanced up from her book, scanning the cabin for any signs of concern from the flight attendants. They continued their routine service, completely unaware. Cassandra had grown up in small-town Montana, where her father ran a crop dusting operation. By age 14, she was already taking flying lessons, and by 18, she had logged more flight hours than most college aviation students. Her acceptance into the Naval Academy had been a dream come true, leading to flight school in Pensacola and eventually to the elite ranks of naval aviators. The woman in the seat next to her, a well-dressed businesswoman named Patricia Hoffman, was deep in conversation with someone on her phone about quarterly earnings reports. Behind them, a family with 3 children was settling in for the overnight flight, the youngest already asleep against the window. The cabin was filled with a typical mix of business travelers, tourists, and families, all trusting their lives to the crew in the cockpit. Captain James Morrison was a 28-year veteran of commercial aviation. Cassandra had briefly introduced herself during boarding, mentioning her military background and upcoming transition to commercial flying. Morrison had been welcoming, sharing stories about the differences between military and civilian aviation. His co-pilot, First Officer David Chun, was relatively new to international routes but had an impressive record from his previous position with a regional carrier. The flight had departed JFK Airport at 9:47 p.m. Eastern Time, 30 minutes behind schedule due to air traffic congestion. Weather conditions were favorable, with clear skies and minimal turbulence expected for the duration of the flight. The aircraft was carrying 312 passengers and 14 crew members, making it nearly at full capacity. Cassandra returned to her novel, but her mind wandered to the challenges ahead. The transition from military to commercial aviation wasn't just about different aircraft systems, it was an entirely different mindset. In the Navy, every mission had the potential for combat situations, requiring split-second decisions that could mean the difference between life and death. Commercial aviation was about routine, predictability, and passenger comfort. The flight attendant, Sarah Williams, approached with the dinner service. She was a 15-year veteran of the airline, known for her professionalism and ability to handle difficult passengers with grace. Sarah had noticed Cassandra's military bearing during boarding and made a mental note to thank her for her service when the opportunity arose. "What can I get you tonight, man?" Sarah asked with a genuine smile. "The salmon, please," Cassandra replied, closing her book and placing it in the seat pocket. "And coffee black." "Certainly. Are you traveling for business or pleasure?" "Actually, I'm transitioning into a career. Just finished 12 years in the Navy." Sarah's expression brightened. "Thank you for your service. What did you do in the Navy?" "I was a pilot, F-18s mostly." "Wow, that's incredible. I bet this feels pretty tame after flying fighter jets." Cassandra smiled. Different kinds of challenges, I suppose. As Sarah continued down the aisle, Cassandra reflected on her decision to leave the military. The Navy had been her life, her identity, but after 12 years of deployments and the constant stress of military life, she was ready for something more predictable. Her fiancé, Michael Torres, was a trauma surgeon in Seattle, and their long-distance relationship had finally reached a point where one of them needed to make a change. The dinner service proceeded smoothly. Passengers settled into their evening routines, some watching movies on the in-flight entertainment system, others working on laptops, and many trying to adjust to the time difference by attempting to sleep. The cabin lights were dimmed to simulate nighttime, creating a peaceful atmosphere 37,000 feet above the ocean. Cassandra finished her meal and returned to her book. The story followed a former CIA operative who found herself in the middle of an international conspiracy while on what should have been a routine vacation. The parallels to her own life transition weren't lost on her, leaving one career behind and hoping for a peaceful future, only to potentially face unexpected challenges. Captain Morrison was in the cockpit, reviewing the flight plan with First Officer Chun. They were having a good time, with favorable tailwinds pushing them slightly ahead of schedule. The weather radar showed clear conditions for the next several 100 miles, and air traffic control had cleared them to maintain their current altitude and heading. Morrison had started his aviation career in the Air Force, flying cargo planes before transitioning to commercial aviation in the late 1990s. He was known among his colleagues for his meticulous attention to detail and calm demeanor under pressure. At 54 years old, he was considering retirement in the next few years, planning to spend more time with his grandchildren in Colorado. Chun, at 32, represented the new generation of commercial pilots. He had gone straight from college to flight school, accumulating hours as a flight instructor before joining the regional airline system. His goal was to eventually captain international routes, and tonight's flight was an important step in that progression. The aircraft's sophisticated autopilot system was handling the flight perfectly, making minor adjustments for wind and maintaining the optimal flight path across the Atlantic. Modern aviation had become incredibly safe through advances in technology, rigorous training protocols, and comprehensive maintenance procedures. Cassandra dozed intermittently, the steady drone of the engines creating a white noise that many frequent flyers found soothing. Her military training had taught her to rest whenever possible, knowing that unexpected situations could arise at any moment. Even in her sleep, part of her mind remained alert to changes in the aircraft's behavior. Around midnight Eastern Time, 3 hours into the flight, Cassandra was awakened by a subtle change in the cabin atmosphere. The engines continued their steady hum, but something felt different. She couldn't immediately identify what had triggered her alert instincts, but 12 years of military training had honed her situational awareness to an extraordinary degree. She glanced around the cabin. Most passengers were asleep, and the flight attendants were in their rest area. The cabin remained dimly lit, with only a few reading lights still on. Everything appeared normal, yet Cassandra couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The feeling intensified when she noticed First Officer Chun emerge from the cockpit, his face pale and his movements urgent. He quickly approached Sarah Williams, who was resting in the galley area. Their conversation was hushed but animated, and Cassandra could see the concern in their body language even from her first-class seat. Chun returned to the cockpit while Sarah began quietly moving through the cabin, clearly looking for someone or something. Her professional demeanor remained intact, but Cassandra could detect the underlying tension in her movements. Patricia Huffman, still awake and working on her laptop, noticed the unusual activity as well. "Is everything okay?" she whispered to Cassandra. "I'm not sure," Cassandra replied, her military instincts now fully engaged. She had learned to trust her intuition, and every instinct was telling her that this routine transatlantic flight was about to become anything but routine. The aircraft continued its steady progress across the dark Atlantic Ocean. Its passengers, unaware that in the cockpit, Captain Morrison was experiencing the first symptoms of what would soon become a life-threatening medical emergency. The next few minutes would test everything Cassandra had learned in her 12 years of military service and transform her from a retiring naval aviator into the only person capable of preventing a catastrophic disaster. Sarah Williams moved through the cabin with practiced efficiency, but Cassandra recognized the urgency beneath her calm exterior. The flight attendant was clearly searching for someone with specific qualifications, her eyes scanning each passenger with careful attention. When Sarah reached the first-class section, she paused at Cassandra's row. "Excuse me, Ms. Mitchell," Sarah said quietly, leaning down to avoid alarming nearby passengers. "I understand you mentioned you're a Navy pilot." "That's correct. Is there a problem?" Sarah's professional composure wavered slightly. "We need to speak with you privately. Could you come with me to the galley area?" Cassandra unbuckled her seatbelt and followed Sarah to the forward galley, where First Officer Chun was waiting with an expression of barely controlled panic. The small space felt cramped with 3 people, but it provided privacy from the sleeping passengers. "Ms. Mitchell, I'm David Chun, first officer on this flight," he began, his voice strained. "We have an emergency situation. Captain Morrison has suffered what appears to be a major heart attack. He's unconscious and unresponsive." The words hit Cassandra like a physical blow. In an instant, her mind shifted from civilian passenger to military officer, analyzing the situation and its implications. "What's his current condition?" "Sarah's trying to stabilize him, but it doesn't look good. We've already contacted medical professionals on board, and Dr. Elizabeth Reynolds from Denver General is with him now, but—" Chun didn't need to finish. They were over the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, hours from any airport, with an incapacitated captain and a first officer who, despite his training, had never handled a crisis of this magnitude on an international route. "What's your experience level?" Cassandra asked directly. "Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I have about 3,200 total flight hours, but most of that is regional routes. This is only my 4th transatlantic crossing as first officer." Chun's honesty was both admirable and terrifying under the circumstances. Dr. Reynolds appeared in the galley entrance, her surgical scrubs stained and her expression grim. "I've done everything I can with the limited equipment available, but he needs immediate cardiac intervention. We're talking minutes, not hours." The implications were clear. Captain Morrison needed to reach a hospital immediately, which meant an emergency landing at the nearest available airport. But executing such a maneuver over the Atlantic required experience and skill that Chun wasn't sure he possessed. "Ms. Mitchell," Chun continued, "Sarah mentioned you fly F-18s. I know it's not the same as commercial aviation, but right now you have more flight experience than anyone else on this aircraft." Cassandra's mind raced through the possibilities. She had never flown a Boeing 777, but her military training had prepared her for exactly these kinds of unexpected situations. Fighter pilots were trained to adapt quickly to new aircraft systems and make life-or-death decisions with limited information. "What's our current position and fuel status?" Chun pulled out a tablet displaying the flight management system data. "We're approximately 1,800 nautical miles from New York and 2,200 miles from London. Fuel is sufficient for either destination, but we also have options for emergency landings in Canada or Iceland." "Gander Airport in Newfoundland," Cassandra said immediately. "It's specifically designed for transatlantic emergency diversions. What's our estimated time there?" "About 90 minutes at current speed, but if we declare an emergency, we can increase our descent rate and speed." Dr. Reynolds interjected, "Captain Morrison's condition is critical." "Every minute counts," Cassandra made her decision. David, I'm going to help you get this aircraft on the ground safely. But I need you to understand, I'm not rated on this aircraft type, so officially, you remain the pilot in command. I'll be acting as an advisor and backup. The relief on Chun's face was palpable. Thank you. What do we do first? First, we need to officially declare an emergency with air traffic control and request immediate clearance to Gander. Then we need to notify the passengers without causing panic. Sarah, can you handle the passenger announcement? Sarah nodded. I'll keep it simple, a medical emergency requiring a precautionary landing. As they moved toward the cockpit, Cassandra's military training took over completely. She began mentally cataloging everything she knew about commercial aircraft. Systems drawing parallels to the complex fighter jets she had piloted for over a decade. The Boeing 777 Cockpit was a marvel of modern aviation technology. With digital displays and automated systems far more advanced than anything in her F-18. However, the basic principles of flight remained the same: lift, thrust, drag, and weight. The physics didn't change, only the specific methods of control. Chun slid into the captain's seat while Cassandra took the first officer's position. She immediately began familiarizing herself with the primary flight displays, engine parameters, and navigation systems. Her hands moved across the controls with the confidence of someone who had spent years adapting to new aircraft configurations. Okay, David, let's get on the radio with Gander Control and declare our emergency. Chun keyed the microphone. Gander Control, this is Transatlantic Flight 847, declaring a medical emergency. We have an incapacitated crew member requiring immediate medical attention and requesting emergency clearance to Gander Airport. The response came immediately. Flight 847, Gander Control copies your emergency declaration. What is the nature of your medical emergency and your current position? Gander Control, we have a crew member with suspected cardiac arrest. Current position approximately 400 miles southeast of your location. We have 312 souls on board with fuel for approximately 4 hours. Flight 847, you are cleared directly to Gander Airport. Descend and maintain flight level 280. Emergency vehicles will be standing by. Please advise of any additional assistance required. Cassandra took over the communication. Gander Control, Flight 847. Be advised we have a qualified military pilot assisting with this emergency. Request direct routing and expedited descent clearance. Flight 847. Cleared direct Gander, descended at pilot's discretion. You are cleared for any altitude changes necessary for this emergency approach. With air traffic control coordination established, Cassandra turned her attention to the aircraft's flight management system. The Boeing 777's automation was both a blessing and a potential complication. While it could handle much of the navigation automatically, she needed to ensure she understood how to override the systems. If manual control became necessary, Chun began configuring the aircraft for the emergency descent. I've never done an emergency approach into Gander. The airport handles a lot of diversions, but usually with experienced crews. The approach is straightforward, Cassandra assured him, calling up the airport information on the navigation display. Gander has long runways designed specifically for wide-body aircraft. The challenging part will be managing our descent rate and approach speed with a full passenger load. Behind them in the cabin, Sarah was making the announcement to passengers. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your senior flight attendant. We are experiencing a medical emergency that requires us to make a precautionary landing in Gander, Newfoundland. This is purely precautionary, and there is no danger to the aircraft or passengers. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened and your seat backs are in the upright position. The announcement created a stir among the passengers, but Sarah's calm demeanor helped prevent panic. Several passengers began asking questions, but the flight attendants were prepared, with reassuring responses. Dr. Reynolds continued working on Captain Morrison in the small crew rest area behind the cockpit. She had managed to establish N4 and was monitoring his vital signs with the limited medical equipment available on board. His condition remained critical, but stable for the moment. "Cassandra," Chun said, using her first name for the first time, "I have to ask, how confident are you about this approach? I mean, I appreciate the help, but lives are at stake here." It was a fair question, and Cassandra respected him for asking it directly. "David, I've made emergency landings on aircraft carriers in rough seas with battle damage to my aircraft. I've landed F-18s with partial hydraulic failures, electrical problems, and fuel emergencies. This Boeing 777 is incredibly well designed and has multiple backup systems. The principles are the same: maintain control, manage your energy, and get the aircraft on the ground safely." Chun nodded, drawing confidence from her certainty. "What do I need to know about the approach?" "We're going to configure early and fly a stable approach. The 777 wants to be flown smoothly, no abrupt control inputs. The auto-throttle system will help us manage our speed, but we need to be prepared to take manual control if necessary." As they began their descent toward Gander, Cassandra noticed something that Chun had missed. The weather conditions at their destination were deteriorating rapidly. What had been clear skies an hour earlier was now showing scattered thunderstorms and gusty winds. "David, check the latest weather for Gander. I'm seeing some concerning patterns on the radar." Chun pulled up the meteorological information and his face paled. Winds are now gusting to 35 knots, visibility down to 2 miles and heavy rain showers. This just got a lot more complicated. Cassandra studied the weather radar display, her military experience in adverse weather conditions coming to the forefront. "We can handle this. The key is timing our approach between the heaviest cells. The 777 can handle much worse conditions than this." Dr. Reynolds appeared in the cockpit doorway. "How much longer until we land?" "Captain Morrison's condition is worsening. His blood pressure is dropping, and I'm concerned about additional cardiac episodes." "Approximately 45 minutes, Cassandra replied. "We're doing everything possible to get him medical attention as quickly as safely possible." The next few minutes would test every skill Cassandra had developed in her military career, as she guided Chun through one of the most challenging approaches either of them had ever attempted. But for now, she focused on the immediate task: getting 312 passengers and a critically injured captain safely to the ground in deteriorating weather conditions. The radar screen painted an ominous picture as Flight 847 descended through 25,000 feet. Bright red and yellow cells indicated severe thunderstorms directly along their approach path to Gander Airport. Cassandra studied the weather patterns with the analytical mind of a combat pilot who had navigated through hostile airspace. "We need to thread the needle between these two storm cells," she told Chun, pointing to a narrow corridor of clearer weather. "It's going to require precise timing and some aggressive maneuvering." Chun's knuckles were white as he gripped the controls. The enormity of the situation was weighing heavily on him to 312 lives, depending on decisions he had never been trained to make under these extreme circumstances. "What if we can't make it through? Should we consider diverting to Halifax or St. John's?" Cassandra quickly calculated the alternatives. "Dr. Reynolds, how much time do we have?" The doctor's voice was grim as she monitored Captain Morrison's deteriorating condition. "His cardiac rhythm is becoming increasingly unstable. I've administered all the medications available in the medical kit, but he needs surgical intervention within the next 30 minutes, or we're going to lose him." Halifax would add another 45 minutes, Cassandra determined. "We're committed to Gander. David, I need you to contact the airport and have them confirm the emergency medical facilities are ready." Chun keyed the radio. Gander Tower. Flight 847 requesting confirmation of medical facilities for cardiac emergencies. We need a surgical team standing by for immediate transport. Flight 847, Gander Tower. Confirming medical emergencies is cardiac in nature. We have arranged for helicopter transport to St. John's General Hospital Cardiac Unit. The surgical team will be standing by at the airport for initial stabilization. The news provided some relief, but they still had to successfully navigate through the storm system and execute a precision approach in challenging weather conditions. Cassandra began mentally preparing for what would essentially be a combat approach, using every skill she had developed in high-stress military operations. David, I want you to hand-fly this approach. The autopilot might not react quickly enough to the wind shears we're going to encounter in these storm cells. Hand-fly? Shun's voice cracked slightly. I've only done that a few times on the 777, and never in weather like this. Trust me on this. You have the fundamental skills. I'm going to talk you through every step. The key is smooth, deliberate control inputs. Fighter jets are twitchy and require constant correction. This aircraft wants to fly straight and level. Work with it, not against it. Behind them, the cabin crew was preparing for the emergency landing. Sarah Williams had briefed the other flight attendants on the brace position procedures and identified able-bodied passengers who could assist in case of evacuation. The passengers sensed the increased tension but remained remarkably calm, trusting in the professionalism of the crew. Patricia Hoffman, the businesswoman seated next to Cassandra's empty first-class seat, had noticed the military pilot's absence and correctly deduced her involvement in whatever crisis was unfolding. She quietly began helping other passengers secure loose items and prepare for what might be a rough landing. At 15,000 feet, they encountered the first significant turbulence. As they approached the outer edges of the storm system, the massive Boeing 777 shuddered and bucked as it hit pockets of severe turbulence. But Cassandra remained focused on the approach parameters. Airspeed is fluctuating between 20 knots above and below target, Chun reported, fighting to maintain control as the aircraft was buffeted by conflicting wind currents. That's normal in these conditions. Don't chase the airspeed. Make gentle corrections and let the aircraft settle. The inertia of this heavy jet works in our favor. Cassandra monitored the weather radar, timing their descent to hit the narrow window between storm cells. Her experience with precision bombing runs had taught her to calculate timing and trajectories under extreme pressure, skills that translated perfectly to this navigation challenge, coming up on the gap between cells in 90 seconds. We need to be at 8,000 feet when we hit that window. Chun increased their descent rate, pushing the aircraft slightly beyond normal parameters, but well within its structural limits. The passengers felt their ears pop as the cabin pressure adjusted, and several looked nervously out the windows at the lightning flashing in the distance. Dr. Reynolds appeared at the cockpit door again. We have another problem. Captain Morrison is going into ventricular fibrillation. I need to use the defibrillator, but the electrical interference from the storm might affect the aircraft systems. Cassandra made a split-second decision. Do it. The aircraft's electrical systems are shielded and isolated. Patient care takes priority. The doctor disappeared back to the medical emergency, and moments later they heard the distinctive whine and discharge of the automated external defibrillator. The cockpit instruments flickered briefly but remained stable. That worked, Dr. Reynolds called out. We have a pulse again, but it's weak and irregular. At 10,000 feet, they broke through the gap between storm cells, and suddenly the ride smoothed dramatically. Ahead of them, the lights of Gander Airport were visible through scattered rain showers. But their approach was far from over. They still had to execute a precision landing on a wet runway with crosswinds gusting up to 35 knots. Gander Tower, Flight 847 is 15 miles southeast, requesting vectors for emergency approach to runway 3. Flight 847, Gander Tower. You are cleared for emergency approach runway 03. Current conditions. Winds 070 degrees at 28 knots gusting to 35. Visibility 2 miles and moderate rain. Ceiling 800 feet broken. Emergency vehicles are in position. Cassandra calculated the wind correction needed for the crosswind landing. David, this is going to require a significant crab angle on final approach. Keep the aircraft aligned with the wind until just before touchdown, then use the rudder to align with the runway centerline. I've never landed in winds this strong, Chun admitted. The 777 is certified for much higher crosswind components than this. Trust the aircraft and your training. I'll call out any corrections needed. As they descended through 5,000 feet, rain began pelting the windscreen, and the runway lights appeared and disappeared through the heavy precipitation. The aircraft shuddered occasionally as it hit pockets of wind shear, but Chun was gaining confidence with each successful correction. Localizer captured, glide slope alive, Chun reported as they intercepted the instrument landing system. Beautiful. Now just fly the needles and maintain your approach speed. Don't let the gusts push you off course. At 3,000 feet, they encountered a severe downdraft that pushed the aircraft 200 feet below the glide path in a matter of seconds. Chun instinctively pulled back on the controls and added power, but his correction was too aggressive. Easy, David. Power first, then attitude. Let me show you. Cassandra placed her hands lightly on the controls. Feel how the aircraft wants to respond. It's heavy and stable. Use that to your advantage. Under her guidance, Chen smoothly corrected back to the proper glide path. His confidence was building with each successful maneuver, and Cassandra could see him transitioning from panic to focused determination. In the cabin, passengers could see the airport lights growing larger through the rain-streaked windows. Some were praying silently, others held hands with strangers, and a few were recording videos on their phones. The flight attendants moved through the aisles one final time, ensuring everyone was properly secured for landing. At 1,000 feet above ground level, they broke out of the clouds and could clearly see the runway ahead. Emergency vehicles were positioned along both sides of the runway, their red and blue lights flashing in the darkness. It was a sobering reminder of the seriousness of their situation. 500 feet, on glide path, approach speed is good, Cassandra called out, taking over the approach callouts to allow Chun to focus entirely on flying the aircraft. 400 feet, slight right drift, correct with rudder. Good correction. 300 feet, you're doing great, David, just like the simulator, but this one's for real. The runway threshold rushed up to meet them as Chun executed a textbook crosswind approach. At the last moment, he applied left rudder to align the aircraft with the center line while maintaining the wing-low technique to compensate for the crosswind. The main landing gear touched down firmly but smoothly, and Chun immediately deployed the thrust reversers and applied maximum braking. The aircraft decelerated rapidly on the wet runway, water spraying dramatically from the wheels as they rolled toward the terminal. Flight 847, Gander Tower, excellent approach. Taxi to the emergency ramp where medical personnel are waiting. As they cleared the runway, Chun finally allowed himself to breathe. We did it. We actually did it. You did it, David. You flew that approach like a 20-year veteran. But their mission wasn't complete yet. Captain Morrison still needed immediate medical attention, and 312 passengers needed to be safely evacuated and cared for at an airport that wasn't their intended destination. The real test of their emergency response was just beginning. The Boeing 777 came to a complete stop on the emergency ramp at Gander Airport, its engines winding down after the harrowing approach. Through the cockpit windows, Cassandra could see a coordinated response that reminded her of military precision operations. Ambulances, fire trucks, and emergency personnel surrounded the aircraft, their vehicles creating a protective perimeter in the driving rain. "Medical team is approaching the aircraft," Chun observed, his voice still shaky from the adrenaline of the emergency landing. "I can't believe we actually pulled that off." Cassandra was already unbuckling her harness, her mind shifting to the next phase of the emergency. "The landing was just the beginning, David. Now we need to get Captain Morrison to those doctors and ensure all passengers are safely evacuated." Dr. Reynolds had been preparing Morrison for immediate transport during their final approach. She had managed to stabilize his cardiac rhythm temporarily, but his condition remained critical. Every second counted in getting him to surgical facilities in St. John's. The main cabin door opened, and a team of Canadian paramedics boarded the aircraft with advanced life support equipment. Leading the team was Dr. Marcus Thompson, an emergency physician from the Health Sciences Center in St. John's who had been flown to Gander specifically for this medical emergency. "I'm Dr. Thompson. Where's our cardiac patient?" Dr. Reynolds met him at the crew rest area. "James Morrison, 54-year-old male, massive myocardial infarction approximately 2 hours ago. I've administered nitroglycerin, aspirin, and used the AED twice. He's currently stable but needs immediate catheterization." Dr. Thompson quickly assessed Morrison's condition while his team prepared the specialized transport equipment. "Good work, Doctor. We have a helicopter standing by, but the weather is marginal. We might need to go by ground ambulance." Outside, Airport Operations Coordinator Rebecca Walsh was managing the complex logistics of an unscheduled international diversion. Gander Airport had extensive experience with emergency landings due to its strategic location on transatlantic routes, but each situation presented unique challenges. "We have 312 passengers who need accommodation, customs processing, and rebooking," Walsh explained to her team. "Contact the hotels in town and see what availability we have. Also, get Transport Canada and CBSA here for the customs processing." Inside the aircraft, Sarah Williams was coordinating the passenger evacuation with remarkable efficiency. Despite the stress of the emergency, she maintained her professional composure while ensuring each passenger understood the procedures. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have landed safely at Gander Airport due to our medical emergency. We ask for your patience as we coordinate with ground personnel. Please remain seated until we give you instructions for deplaning." Cassandra emerged from the cockpit to find passengers looking at her with a mixture of curiosity and gratitude. Word had spread through the cabin that a military pilot had assisted with the emergency landing, and several passengers approached her with thanks. Dr. Patricia Hoffman was among the first to speak with her. "I heard you helped save all our lives tonight. Is the captain going to be okay?" "The medical team is doing everything possible for him," Cassandra replied diplomatically. "Right now, our priority is getting everyone safely off the aircraft and into the terminal." The evacuation proceeded methodically. Passengers with connecting flights in London were particularly concerned about their travel plans, but the airline's customer service representatives were already working on rebooking options. Families with children received priority assistance. From the ground crew, among the passengers was retired Air Force Colonel Robert Harrison, who had served 2 tours in Afghanistan before transitioning to civilian life. He recognized Cassandra's bearing and approached her as they waited to deplane. "Military?" he asked simply. "Navy, 12 years, F-18s, Cassandra confirmed. Harrison nodded with understanding. "Thank you for stepping up tonight. That's what we're trained for, to serve when called upon, regardless of the circumstances." Meanwhile, the medical team had successfully transferred Captain Morrison to the waiting ambulance. The helicopter transport had been scrubbed due to deteriorating weather conditions, but the ground ambulance was equipped with advanced cardiac life support capabilities for the 3-hour journey to St. John's. Dr. Thompson provided a final update. Before departing, we've got him stabilized for transport, but the next few hours are critical. The surgical team in St. John's is standing by for immediate catheterization when we arrive. As the ambulance departed with emergency lights flashing, Cassandra felt a profound sense of responsibility for Morrison's well-being. In the military, she had been part of search and rescue operations where every decision carried life or death consequences. But this situation felt uniquely personal. Chun was completing the post-flight paperwork with the airport authorities, documenting the emergency procedures that had been followed. Transport Canada investigators would review every aspect of the incident, but preliminary indications were that all protocols had been properly executed. "Ms. Mitchell," Chun called out, "the investigators want to speak with you about your role in the emergency response." Cassandra met with Transport Canada Safety Inspector Janet Morrison, ironically sharing the same surname as the injured captain. Inspector Morrison was thorough but respectful in her questioning, recognizing that Cassandra's actions had likely prevented a much worse outcome. "You understand that assisting in the operation of a commercial aircraft without proper certification raises regulatory questions," Morrison began. "I understand completely," Cassandra replied. "I acted as an advisor only, with First Officer Chun maintaining full command authority. My role was to provide guidance based on my military flight experience. Your actions appear to have been exemplary under the circumstances. We'll need a detailed written statement, but preliminarily, it seems you operated well within the bounds of emergency assistance." The terminal at Gander Airport had been transformed into a temporary accommodation center. Airport staff, assisted by local volunteers, had set up cots and provided food and beverages for the stranded passengers. The small Newfoundland community was renowned for its hospitality, demonstrated dramatically during the September 11th attacks, when they accommodated thousands of diverted passengers. Local resident volunteer Mary Catherine O'Brien was coordinating with the Red Cross to provide additional support. "We've done this before," she explained to overwhelmed passengers. "Gander knows how to take care of people who find themselves here unexpectedly." Several passengers were dealing with significant disruptions to important commitments. Business executive Jonathan Pierce was supposed to present to the board of directors in London the following morning, while Dr. Amanda Foster was scheduled to speak at an international medical conference. "I understand this is frustrating, airline." Customer service representative Lisa Chen explained to the group of affected passengers, "We're working with our partners to get you to London as quickly as possible. Most likely, we'll have aircraft available tomorrow evening." For Cassandra, the delay created an unexpected opportunity. She contacted her fiancé Michael in Seattle to explain the situation, finding comfort in his voice despite the 3-hour time difference. "Are you okay?" "I saw something on the news about an emergency landing in Canada," Michael said with obvious concern. "I'm fine. It was an intense situation, but everyone is safe now. The captain is in critical condition, but he's getting the medical care he needs. You stepped in to help, didn't you?" "That's exactly what I would expect from you." Michael's understanding reinforced Cassandra's decision to transition from military to civilian life. His support meant everything as she navigated this career change, and tonight's events had proven that her skills would transfer effectively to commercial aviation. As the evening progressed, Cassandra found herself reflecting on the dramatic events. 6 hours earlier, she had been reading a thriller novel in first class, anticipating a routine transatlantic flight. Now she was part of a real-life drama that had tested every skill she had developed over 12 years of military service. First Officer Chun approached her in the terminal. "I wanted to thank you again. I don't know what would have happened without your help tonight. You would have figured it out, David. You had the skills. You just needed someone to help you access them under pressure. Still, I owe you my career, and 312 passengers owe you their lives." The conversation was interrupted by an announcement from the airline station manager. "Ladies and gentlemen, We have an update on Captain Morrison's condition. He has successfully undergone emergency surgery in St. John's and is listed in stable but critical condition. The surgical team is optimistic about his recovery. A spontaneous cheer erupted from the passengers who had gathered in the terminal. Many had been quietly worried about the captain's fate, and the positive news provided emotional relief after the traumatic experience. Local news crews had arrived at the airport, drawn by reports of the dramatic emergency landing. Reporter Susan McLeod from CBC Newfoundland approached Cassandra for an interview. "I understand you played a crucial role in tonight's emergency. Can you tell us what happened?" "I was simply a passenger who was able to provide some assistance to the flight crew." First Officer Chun deserves all the credit for successfully executing a very challenging approach and landing. Despite her attempts to deflect attention, word of Cassandra's role began spreading beyond the local media. Social media posts from passengers began highlighting the military hero who had helped save their flight, and the story was gaining traction on national news networks. As dawn approached, over Gander Airport, Cassandra realized that her last day as a naval aviator had ended in a way she never could have imagined. Instead of a quiet transition to civilian life, she had been thrust into a situation that showcased exactly why her military training remained valuable in the civilian world. The emergency was over, but the aftermath would continue to unfold in ways that would change not only her life, but the lives of everyone who had been aboard Flight 847 that night. 20-4 hours after the emergency landing, Cassandra found herself in an unexpected situation. What should have been her arrival in London had instead become an extended stay in Gander, where she was now the center of an international media storm that had grown far beyond anything she could have anticipated. The story had broken on social media first. Patricia Huffman, the businesswoman from First Class, had posted a detailed account on LinkedIn that went viral within hours. Her post, titled, "How a Navy Pilot Saved 312 Lives at 37,000 Feet, had been shared thousands of times and picked up by major news outlets across North America and Europe. "I never intended for this to become such a big story," Patricia explained to Cassandra over coffee in the airport's makeshift passenger lounge. "But people need to know what you did up there. You didn't just assist, you took command of an impossible situation and brought us all home safely." CNN's aviation correspondent Jake Sullivan had flown to Gander overnight to cover the story. His morning broadcast from the airport tarmac painted Cassandra as a reluctant hero who had stepped up when civilian aviation needed military precision. "What we're seeing here is a perfect example of how military training translates to civilian emergency response," Sullivan reported. "Lieutenant Commander Mitchell's actions demonstrate the value of cross-training and adaptability in crisis situations." But the media attention was making Cassandra increasingly uncomfortable. She had agreed to one brief interview with CBC, hoping to clarify her role and deflect credit to the professional crew. But the story had taken on a life of its own. Admiral Rebecca Thompson, Cassandra's former commanding officer at Naval Air Station Oceana, called personally to congratulate her. "You've brought great honor to naval aviation, Mitchell. The whole service is talking about what you did." "Ma'am, I was just doing what any pilot would do in that situation. That's exactly why you're getting recognition. You didn't see it as extraordinary, you saw it as duty. That's what separates military aviators from the rest." The conversation reminded Cassandra why she had chosen to serve in the first place. The Navy had instilled in her a sense of responsibility that extended far beyond her official duties, a mindset that had proven invaluable when civilian lives were at stake. First Officer Chun had become an unlikely celebrity himself, praised for his composure under extreme pressure. During a phone interview with Aviation Week, he was generous in crediting Cassandra's guidance while taking appropriate responsibility for his own actions. "I want to be clear about something," Chun told. The interviewer. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell didn't fly the airplane, I did. But she gave me the confidence and technical knowledge to execute an approach that was beyond my previous experience level. That's the mark of a true instructor and leader. The interview had been arranged by the airline's public relations team, who were working overtime to manage the story's impact on the company's reputation. While the emergency had ended successfully, questions were being raised about crew training protocols and the wisdom of assigning relatively inexperienced first officers to international routes. Transatlantic Airways CEO Margaret Foster held a press conference from the company's headquarters in New York, addressing the concerns directly. Our preliminary investigation shows that our crew followed all appropriate emergency procedures. The successful outcome demonstrates both the effectiveness of our training programs and the professionalism of our personnel. However, Foster also announced immediate policy changes. We are implementing enhanced simulation training for emergency scenarios and requiring additional experience requirements for international route assignments. We are also exploring formal partnerships with military aviation to provide cross-training opportunities. Dr. Reynolds, the passenger who had provided medical care to Captain Morrison, was dealing with her own media requests. As an emergency physician, she understood the critical nature of the medical emergency and the time constraints they had faced. Captain Morrison's survival is a testament to the entire emergency response chain, she explained during a telephone interview with Medical News Today. From the flight crew's quick decision-making to the paramedics in Gander to the surgical team in St. John's, everyone performed flawlessly under pressure. The latest medical update was encouraging. Captain Morrison had undergone successful triple bypass surgery and was showing signs of neurological recovery. His wife, Linda Morrison, had flown from their home in Denver to be with him during his recovery. I want to personally thank everyone who helped save my husband's life, Linda said in a statement released through the hospital. Especially Lieutenant Commander Mitchell and First Officer Chun, who made the impossible decisions that got him to medical care in time. Meanwhile, the passengers from Flight 847 were finally preparing for their continuation to London. A replacement aircraft and crew had arrived from New York, and the airline was working to accommodate everyone on the delayed flight. The passenger manifest had become a diverse group bound together by their shared experience. Business travelers, who normally wouldn't speak to each other, had formed lasting friendships during their unexpected overnight stay in Gander. Retired Colonel Harrison had spent considerable time speaking with Cassandra about the transition from military to civilian life. You're going to find that experiences like this follow you, he warned. People will always see you as the military officer first, the civilian second. That can be both a blessing and a burden. His words proved prophetic when representatives from 3 major airlines approached Cassandra with job offers. United Airlines Chief Pilot Captain Sandra Williams called personally to discuss opportunities in their training department. We need instructors with your kind of experience and judgment, Williams explained. What you demonstrated in that cockpit is exactly the kind of decision-making we want to develop in our pilots. Delta Airlines made an even more attractive offer, proposing a position as Director of Emergency Procedures Training, a newly created role that would involve developing scenarios based on real-world incidents like Flight 847. But the most intriguing opportunity came from an unexpected source. The Federal Aviation Administration's administrator, Robert Chun, no relation to First Officer Chun, called to discuss a position with the agency's Office of Accident Investigation. We need people who understand both military and civilian aviation systems, Administrator Chen explained. Your experience last night demonstrated exactly the kind of cross-platform expertise we're looking for in our investigators. The offer was tempting, but Cassandra was still processing the events of the past 24 hours. Her original plan had been to join a regional airline to build civilian flight hours before moving to a major carrier. Now she was being offered positions that would typically require years of commercial aviation experience. Michael called from Seattle with his own perspective on the situation. "Whatever you decide, I'm proud of you. But don't let other people's expectations drive your decision. You've spent 12 years serving others. Make sure your next choice serves you too." His advice resonated as Cassandra watched the replacement aircraft arrive on the tarmac. The Boeing 777 looked identical to the one they had landed in emergency conditions, but she knew she would never view commercial aviation the same way again. Airport Operations Coordinator Rebecca Walsh had been fielding calls from aviation safety organizations around the world. The incident was already being studied as a case example of successful emergency resource management. We've had delegations from Transport Canada, the FAA, and even the European Aviation Safety Agency asking for detailed briefings, Walsh explained. This is becoming a textbook case of how military and civilian aviation can work together during emergencies. The international attention was also focusing on Gander Airport's role as a critical diversionary facility for transatlantic flights. Proposals were being developed to enhance the airport's medical facilities and emergency response capabilities based on lessons learned from Flight 847. Local hotel owner Frank Murphy had housed 37 of the stranded passengers and was amazed by the global attention the incident was receiving. "We've had reporters from as far away as Australia asking about what happened here. It's put our little community on the map in a way we never expected." The community response had been overwhelming. Local restaurants had donated meals, residents had opened their homes to passengers, and the volunteer response had been coordinated with military-like precision. It was a reminder of the human connections that emerge during crisis situations. As evening approached and passengers began boarding the replacement flight, Cassandra made a decision that would surprise many people. Instead of accepting the immediate job offers or rushing into a new career path, she chose to complete her original journey to London. "I need some time to process what happened and make decisions about my future without the pressure of media attention," she explained to the reporters who had gathered for her departure. But as Flight 847's replacement lifted off from Gander Airport, Cassandra knew that her life had changed permanently. The skills that had made her an effective naval aviator had proven invaluable in civilian aviation, opening doors she had never imagined. The question now was which door to choose and how. To balance her own aspirations with the expectations that came from being thrust into the spotlight as an unlikely hero. The next chapter of her life would be written in the choices she made in the coming weeks, as she navigated between military discipline and civilian opportunity. 6 months after the emergency landing at Gander Airport, Cassandra stood in the cockpit of a Boeing 777-300ER at London Heathrow, wearing the 4 stripes of a senior first officer with British International Airways. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was now flying the same aircraft type she had helped land during that stormy night in Newfoundland. Captain Eleanor Hayes, a 25-year veteran of commercial aviation, was completing the pre-flight checklist for their departure to Singapore. Hayes had specifically requested Cassandra as her first officer after reading about the Gander incident in Aviation International magazine. "Ready for another transatlantic crossing?" Hayes asked with a knowing smile. "Just another day at the office," Cassandra replied, though they both knew that after Gander, no flight would ever be truly routine for her again. The path to this moment had been anything but straightforward. After arriving in London following the emergency, Cassandra had spent 2 weeks in quiet reflection, staying in a small cottage in the Cotswolds while considering her options. The media attention had followed her across the Atlantic, but she had managed to avoid most interviews while processing the life-changing events. During those reflective days, She had received an unexpected call from Captain James Morrison himself. He had recovered sufficiently from his surgery to contact her personally from his hospital bed in St. John's. "I wanted to thank you for saving my life," Morrison had said, his voice still weak but determined. "The doctors told me that every minute counted, and your decision to get us to Gander as quickly as possible made the difference between life and death. How are you feeling, Captain?" "Better every day. The doctors say I'll make a full recovery, though my flying days are over. But that's okay. I've got grandchildren to spoil and a garden to tend. More importantly, I wanted you to know that what you did up there was extraordinary. You didn't just help land an airplane. You saved 312 lives." The conversation had helped Cassandra understand the true weight of her actions that night. In the military, life and death decisions were part of the job description, but seeing the direct personal impact on Morrison and his family had given new meaning to her choice to help. The job offers had continued to pour in even after her arrival. In London, Boeing had offered her a position as a test pilot for their new generation of commercial aircraft. The National Transportation Safety Board had proposed a role in accident investigation. Even NASA had reached out about opportunities in their astronaut training program. But the most compelling offer had come from an unexpected source. British International Airways had proposed something entirely unique, a position that would allow her to serve as both a line pilot and an emergency procedures instructor, splitting her time between regular flights and training other pilots in crisis management. The airline's CEO, Sir Geoffrey Hamilton, had flown to London personally to meet with her. "What you demonstrated over the Atlantic was exactly what we want to develop in our pilot corps," he had explained. "Not just technical competency, but the judgment and leadership to handle unprecedented situations." The position offered the best of both worlds, the opportunity to continue flying while also developing the next generation of commercial pilots. It was a chance to bridge the gap between military and civilian aviation in a way that could benefit the entire industry. Dr. Reynolds, the physician who had treated Captain Morrison during the emergency, had also found her life changed by the events of that night. She had been invited to join the International Association of Aviation Medicine as an advisor on in-flight medical emergencies, helping to develop better protocols for treating cardiac patients at altitude. First Officer David Chun had taken a slightly different path. The experience had accelerated his career advancement, and he was now a captain with Transatlantic Airways, flying domestic routes while building the experience needed for international command. The airline had also appointed him as a spokesperson for their enhanced training programs. "The Gander incident taught us that emergencies don't wait for convenient timing," Chun had explained during a presentation to the International Airline Pilots Association. "Every pilot needs to be prepared to exceed their normal limitations when lives are at stake." The ripple effects of Flight 847's emergency had extended far beyond the individuals directly involved. The Federal Aviation Administration had implemented new requirements for cross-training between military and civilian pilots. Several airlines had established formal partnerships with military aviation to provide emergency scenario training. Gander Airport had received international recognition for its emergency response capabilities, leading to substantial investments in medical facilities and equipment. The small Newfoundland community had embraced its role as a critical safety net for transatlantic aviation. Rebecca Walsh, the airport operations coordinator, had been promoted to Director of Emergency Services and was now consulting with airports worldwide on crisis management protocols. What we learned from Flight 847 was that every element of the emergency response chain needs to be prepared for the unexpected, she explained to a delegation from Tokyo's Narita Airport. The passengers from Flight 847 had formed an unlikely community, staying in touch through social media and organizing annual reunions. Patricia Hoffman had started a nonprofit organization focused on aviation safety advocacy. using her business connections to fund research into emergency response procedures. Retired Colonel Harrison had become a mentor to Cassandra during her transition to civilian aviation. His advice about balancing military identity with civilian expectations had proven invaluable as she navigated her new career. The challenge, Harrison had told her during one of their regular phone conversations, is remembering that your military training is an asset, not a limitation. Don't try to hide who you are. Use it to make civilian aviation better. Captain Morrison had made a remarkable recovery, though as predicted, his flying career had ended. He had become an advocate for improved cardiac screening for commercial pilots and had testified before congressional committees about the importance of emergency medical training for flight crews. His wife, Linda, had started a support group for families of pilots who had experienced medical emergencies, providing resources and emotional support during what was often a traumatic transition period. The investigation into Flight 847's emergency had been completed 6 months after the incident. Transport Canada's final report had praised the crew's decision-making and emergency response, while also recommending several industry-wide improvements. The report had specifically commended Cassandra's role. The assistance provided by Lieutenant Commander Mitchell demonstrated exceptional airmanship and judgment. Her military training and experience proved invaluable in a civilian emergency situation, highlighting the benefits of cross-platform aviation experience. Now, as Cassandra completed her pre-flight checks for the Singapore route, she reflected on how much her life had changed since that night, when she was simply a passenger reading a thriller novel. The transition from military to civilian aviation had been more dramatic than she could have imagined, but it had also been more rewarding. Singapore Departure Control, British International 205 requesting taxi clearance. Captain Hayes transmitted as they prepared to leave the gate. As they taxied toward the runway, Cassandra's phone buzzed with a text message from Michael, who was now her husband after a small ceremony in Seattle 3 months earlier. Fly safe, hero. See you in Singapore tomorrow. The nickname still made her uncomfortable, but she had learned to accept that the events of Flight 847 would always be part of her story. More importantly, she had discovered that her military experience could contribute to civilian aviation in ways she had never considered. British International Airways had given her the platform to develop new training protocols that were being adopted by airlines worldwide. Her emergency procedures course, based on the lessons learned from the Gander incident, was now mandatory for all new hires and had been requested by pilots from dozens of other carriers. The irony was that, by trying to leave her military identity behind, she had found a way to make it more valuable than ever. The skills that had made her an effective naval aviator, quick decision-making, calm under pressure, adaptability to new situations, were exactly what civilian aviation needed in an increasingly complex world. As Flight BIA 205 lifted off from Heathrow's runway 27L, climbing into the clear London sky, Cassandra realized that she had finally found the perfect balance between her military past and civilian future. She was no longer trying to transition away from who she had been. Instead, she was using that experience to become who she was meant to be. The 13-hour flight to Singapore would be routine, but Cassandra now understood that in aviation, routine was a privilege that could change in an instant. The difference was that she was now prepared for those moments when routine became extraordinary, when ordinary passengers looked to ordinary crew members to do extraordinary things. 6 months ago, she had been reading a thriller novel about international intrigue while flying as a passenger. Now she was living her own story, one that combined the precision of military aviation with the responsibility of commercial flight operations. It wasn't the career transition she had planned, but it was exactly the path she was meant to follow. As they reached cruising altitude and settled in for the long flight across Europe and Asia, Cassandra opened her flight bag and pulled out a book, the same thriller novel she had been reading that night over the Atlantic. She had never finished it, but somehow that seemed appropriate. Her own story had turned out to be far more compelling than any fiction. 2 years after Flight 847's emergency landing, Cassandra Mitchell-Torres stood before an audience of 500 aviation professionals at the International Aviation Safety Conference in Dubai. The auditorium was packed with pilots, air traffic controllers, safety investigators, and airline executives from around the world, all gathered to hear her keynote presentation on crisis leadership in modern aviation. The conference badge around her neck read, Captain Cassandra Mitchell-Torres, Director of Advanced Flight Training, British International Airways. The promotion to captain had come 18 months ahead of the typical timeline, but her unique combination of military experience and emergency response expertise had made her one of the most sought-after instructors in commercial aviation. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, clicking to her first slide showing Flight 847's route map. 2 years ago, I was a passenger reading a book. By the end of that night, I had learned that preparation and instinct can turn ordinary people into extraordinary responders when lives depend on it. In the audience, First Officer David Chun, now Captain Chun, sat with his wife and their newborn daughter. He had flown from New York specifically to attend Cassandra's presentation. The Gander incident had bonded them in a way that transcended typical professional relationships. Also present was Dr. Elizabeth Reynolds, who had become the leading expert on high-altitude cardiac emergencies. Her research, partly funded by the International Association of Aviation Medicine, had led to improved medical protocols that were now standard on all major airlines. The presentation screen displayed a photograph of Captain James Morrison, now fully recovered and working as a safety consultant. He had become an advocate for mandatory cardiac screening for commercial pilots over age 50, legislation that was pending in both the United States and European Union. Captain Morrison's recovery represents more than just medical success, Cassandra explained. It demonstrates how every link in the emergency response chain, from initial recognition to final treatment, must function perfectly under pressure. The audience included Admiral Rebecca Thompson, Cassandra's former commanding officer, who had flown from Virginia to attend the conference. The Navy had embraced Cassandra's civilian success as validation of their pilot training programs, and several other branches of military aviation had developed similar transition partnerships with commercial airlines. The skills that military aviation teaches, rapid decision-making, adaptability, leadership under pressure, these aren't just useful in combat situations, Admiral Thompson had explained to a Pentagon briefing the previous month. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell proved they're essential for civilian safety as well. The presentation continued with detailed analysis of the emergency procedures that had saved Flight 847, Cassandra's training protocols, now implemented by 12 major airlines worldwide, had been credited with improving emergency response times by an average of 23% across the industry. Boeing's chief test pilot, Captain Maria Santos, was taking detailed notes. The aircraft manufacturer had collaborated with Cassandra to develop new simulator scenarios based on the Gander incident, scenarios that were now part of mandatory training for all 777 pilots globally. The most important lesson we learned, Cassandra continued, isn't about technology or procedures. It's about human factors, how people perform when everything familiar becomes unfamiliar, when routine becomes crisis. In the back of the auditorium, Patricia Hoffman smiled with pride. Her LinkedIn post about the emergency had evolved into a foundation that funded aviation safety research. She had become one of the most influential advocates for passenger rights and emergency preparedness in commercial aviation. The presentation included video testimonials from several Flight 847 passengers, including retired Colonel Harrison, who had helped establish a mentorship program connecting military aviators with civilian airlines. His program had facilitated over 200 successful career transitions in 2 years. What struck me most about Commander Mitchell's actions, Harrison said in the video, wasn't her technical skill, though that was impressive. It was her immediate acceptance of responsibility for people she had never met. That's the essence of military service, and it's exactly what civilian aviation needs more of. Rebecca Walsh, now Director of Emergency Services at Gander Airport, had provided footage of the enhanced medical facilities that had been installed following the Flight 847 incident. The airport had become a model for emergency preparedness, hosting training exercises for airports across North America and Europe. The presentation's climax featured recorded audio from the actual emergency, carefully edited to protect privacy, while demonstrating the communication and coordination that had made the successful landing possible. The audience listened in complete silence as Cassandra's voice guided Chun through the storm-battered approach. Following the audio, Cassandra shared the latest development in her career. Next month, I'll be joining the International Civil Aviation Organization as Director of Emergency Response Training. This position will allow me to work with airlines and airports worldwide to implement the lessons we've learned. The announcement generated spontaneous applause. The ICAO position represented the pinnacle of international aviation safety leadership, typically reserved for individuals with decades of experience. For Cassandra, it was the perfect synthesis of her military background and civilian aviation expertise. During the question and answer session, a young pilot from Singapore Airlines asked about the psychological impact of the emergency. How did you process the responsibility of so many lives depending on your decisions? Cassandra paused thoughtfully before answering. In military aviation, we train constantly for situations where split-second decisions determine life or death. But that night taught me that the real measure of a pilot isn't technical skill. It's the willingness to act when action is required, regardless of personal risk or recognition. Captain Hayes, Cassandra's former flying partner at British International Airways, was in the audience representing the European Airline Pilots Association. She had become one of the most vocal advocates for cross-training programs between military and civilian aviation. Commander Mitchell changed how we think about emergency preparedness, Hayes explained to a journalist covering the conference. Her military perspective brought discipline and systematic thinking that transformed our training protocols. The conference concluded with the presentation of the International Aviation Safety Foundation's Lifetime Achievement Award to Cassandra, extraordinary recognition for someone only 2 years into civilian aviation. The award citation read, "For exceptional courage, leadership, and innovation in emergency response procedures that have enhanced safety across global commercial aviation." As applause filled the auditorium, Cassandra reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The scared passenger reading a thriller novel seemed like a different person entirely, yet she understood that every experience, from her first solo flight in Montana to her final F-18 mission to that terrifying night over the Atlantic, had prepared her for this role. Following the ceremony, she called Michael in Seattle, where he was completing his surgical residency. Their marriage had thrived despite the demanding travel schedules, strengthened by mutual respect for each other's dedication to saving lives. "How did it go?" Michael asked. "Better than I expected. I think we're really making a difference in aviation safety. I'm proud of you. When you get back, we need to talk about something important." "What's that?" "I got the attending position at Seattle Children's Hospital. It's time for us to start thinking about our own family." As Cassandra walked through Dubai International Airport later that evening, boarding her flight back to London, she thought about the future. The ICAO position would be challenging, requiring extensive international travel and complex diplomatic negotiations. But it also offered the opportunity to impact aviation safety on a global scale. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was about to spend the next several years traveling constantly, teaching others how to handle the kind of emergency she had experienced as a passenger. But this time, she would be prepared for whatever unexpected challenges arose. As her flight lifted off into the clear Dubai night, climbing toward cruising altitude above the Persian Gulf, Cassandra opened her briefcase and pulled out a familiar book, the same thriller novel she had been reading that night over the Atlantic. She had finally finished it 6 months ago, but kept it as a reminder of how quickly life could change direction. The story had ended with the protagonist discovering that the skills she thought she was leaving behind were exactly what the world needed most. Art imitating life, or perhaps life imitating art. Either way, Cassandra knew she was exactly where she belonged, not as a passenger watching events unfold, but as a leader shaping the future of aviation safety for generations to come. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload. From us